This first video focuses on one of my favorite learning strategies, the Feynman Technique. This is a video about how to use this powerful technique when you are studying alone. If you've ever felt stuck rereading notes or watching videos without anything really sticking, this video will show you how to actively process and truly understand what you are learning. The Feynman Technique is one of the most popular study strategies out there. The core idea is simple. You learn best by teaching. But what happens when you don't have anyone to teach? I'm a professional academic coach, and in this video, we'll explore how to use the Feynman Technique when you're studying alone. To understand how to use the Feynman Technique by yourself, it helps to look where it came from. In his autobiography, Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman describes studying for his PhD comprehensive oral exams. He isolated himself, pulled out a notebook and titled it, "Things I Don't Know About Physics." This is actually one of the trickiest parts about studying. How do you know what you don't know? Feynman figured it out by first writing down what he did know. Today, learning specialists call this technique brain dumping or blurting. By recalling everything from memory, he was able to see the gaps in his knowledge. Then he went back to the notes and to the books to fill in those missing pieces. He describes this magical moment. His notebook eventually contained everything he needed to know, but it wasn't copied from a textbook. It was organized in a way that made sense to his brain, simplified into his own words. This is why Feynman became such a powerful teacher. He reconstructed knowledge so it fit his unique way of thinking. That story gives us the roadmap for using the Feynman Technique when studying alone. The first step is to brain dump on whatever topic you're trying to learn. This forces you to move away from academic language and rephrase things in a way that makes sense to you. As you do this, you'll start to naturally organize the information, and most importantly, you'll see exactly what you don't know. Step 2, fill in the gaps. Once you've spotted the gaps, go back to your notes, lectures, or textbook. Fill in the missing knowledge and add it to your notebook. In education, this process is often called assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation means that you're adding new knowledge into an existing mental framework. Accommodation, you are changing that framework when the new information doesn't quite fit. Both are essential for real learning. Step 3, simplify. The next step is to simplify. A common mistake is trying to learn too much at once, which overwhelms your brain and causes cognitive fatigue. And when you're fatigued, you quit. So start with the basics, the big picture, before diving into the small details. Feynman emphasized this by asking, how would you teach this to a child? When teaching a child, you highlight the key concepts, the fundamental ideas. Once the big picture is clear, you can layer on details in later study sessions. This gradual layering leads to deeper and more complex understanding over time. Step 4, apply what you know. Finally, Feynman talks about turning what you're learning into a story. That means coming up with your own examples. It means asking, how can I apply this knowledge? How is it similar to something I know? How is it different from what I've learned before? This is deep thinking. This is the kind of thinking that makes information stick. The refinement cycle. At this point, you repeat the process. Do another brain dump. The information you recall should now be richer, more detailed, and uniquely yours. Then refine again, then brain dump again. Each cycle leaves a stronger imprint on your memory and your understanding. Over time, you'll find that you're not just memorizing facts, you're truly mastering concepts. So here's the recap. 1, brain dump what you know. 2, fill in your knowledge gaps. 3, simplify in your own words. 4, apply what you know. 5, repeat that cycle until it sticks. This is how you can use the Feynman Technique even when you're studying alone. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe for more science-backed study strategies. You've got this. The Feynman Technique is part of a bigger system. In this video, I will walk through the complete study system I teach my students, step by step. You will see how the Feynman Technique fits as the final stage of learning after the groundwork has been laid. I have seen this exact system take students from failing grades to A's within a single semester. It is structured, repeatable, and grounded in how the brain actually learns. Picture this. Straight A high school senior who barely needed to open a book. now staring at a 47% on her first college biology exam. If that sounds familiar, you are not broken. Your brain just needs a better study system. My name is Dr. Eric Albinson, and over the last 6 years, I've watched thousands of smart students hit the college wall. Your high school study habits? Dead on arrival. In this video, I'm cutting through the study myths and giving you the exact neuroscience-backed system I use to help college students ace their academic transition from high school to college. Before we get into specific study systems, we need to understand how the brain learns. The information processing model helps explain this remarkable process. Learning begins in your short-term or working memory, the thinking space of your brain where you actively engage with information. As you rehearse or repeat that information, it becomes encoded into long-term memory. Repetition is a key part of learning. Hebb's law states that neurons that fire together wire together. When you think about something, a sequence of neurons fires and forms a loose connection. With continued repetition, those connections strengthen, eventually forming a dense neural network, or long-term memory. Here's the key. You haven't truly learned something until it's stored in long-term memory. Hebb's law helps explain the mechanics behind a much larger idea: neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to rewire itself. This is what makes learning possible. But here's the problem. Most students don't study in ways that align with how the brain actually likes to learn. You can think of neuroplasticity as the biological foundation of learning and growth. It's how your brain rewires itself to make learning possible. And that's where many students unknowingly fight against their own biology. Repetition is a part of learning, for sure, but on its own, it is slow and passive. It is the lowest form of studying. I call it feel-good studying. It feels productive because it's easy and familiar. It is definitely the most common form of studying in high school and in general, but it rarely leads to mastery and doesn't work very well in college. Repetition studying produces shallow recognition rather than deep understanding. It's a familiarity trap. Students believe they know the material, but during exams they can't recall it. They only recognize it. I can always tell when I'm working with a repetition studier. They can describe exactly where the information is in their notes or textbook, but when the test comes, they just can't retrieve it from memory. So how do you correct this? You test yourself. The testing effect focuses on memory retrieval, pulling information from your head without any prompts. This can look like whiteboarding, teaching the material to someone else, solving math problems without any notes, or simply brain dumping everything you know about a topic into a notebook. When you recall information without prompts, you naturally start to translate it into your own language and organize it in ways that make sense to you. That active engagement is what strengthens learning. Neuroplasticity also explains another powerful study strategy: spaced repetition. It's the opposite of cramming. Instead of trying to shove all that information into your brain at once, you spread your study sessions out over time. Each time you revisit the material, you're strengthening those neural connections. By spacing out your studying, you give your brain time to build strong neural networks and durable knowledge. This is why cramming doesn't work. Students often think of learning capacity as unlimited, but it's not. Learning is a physiological process just like building muscle. We all know that one intense workout won't make you strong overnight. The brain works the same way. Learning is about consistency, not intensity. If you have 3 weeks between exams, you should be studying over those 3 weeks. A common mistake first-year students make is waiting until the week before the exam. In high school, when all you had to do was memorize facts, yeah, this worked. But in college, there is simply too much material to encode effectively in that short time, and you are expected to apply that knowledge. You're expected to learn deeply. You need to give your brain time and space to build its neural networks one layer at a time. Now that we understand neuroscience basics, let's hop into our study systems. The core learning system. C, collect. Your job is to gather all the key concepts you're expected to know for your class. The key is to understand that not one source is comprehensive. A common rookie mistake is just to take notes in class and rely on them for your studying. In Intro to Biology, your professor might lecture from slides, assign textbook reading, use online quizzes, give videos. Each piece is part of the puzzle, and your job is to integrate them into one cohesive story. How do you know what's important? Look for the big ideas your professor keeps coming back to, the terms that keep showing up in lectures, slides, and practice exams. Don't copy everything word for word. Instead, summarize it in your own language. As you build your study materials, look for overlap between sources. If the lecture, textbook, and quiz all emphasize the same point, that's a clear signal that that information matters. On the other hand, if something shows up only once, ask yourself if it connects to the bigger idea or if it's just a detail that you probably won't need to know on the exam. When you try to study from each source separately, your brain gets overwhelmed. This is known as the split attention effect. When your working memory has to bounce back and forth between materials that are meant to be understood as one unit, you end up holding one piece of information in your mind while searching for another one. This wastes mental energy. Instead of learning the concept, your brain is busy stitching the pieces together and the information slips through the cracks. So your first task is to reduce the strain on your brain by combining all essential information into one organized study guide. And that brings us to the next step. Organize. Now that you've gathered all the key concepts, it's time to build your study guide. What you're really doing here is creating a mental framework, what educators call schema, and that helps your brain see how everything connects. Learning is clear thinking, and your brain thinks best when information is organized visually, spatially, and verbally. It needs to see how ideas fit together. When you start learning something new, begin with the basics, the core concepts, and map them into an initial framework of understanding. You can do this through mind maps, charts, timelines, or outlines. Once you've mapped how everything connects, you've built a foundation you can now layer new information onto. With each study session, you add depth and structure. Your study guide becomes a living document that grows alongside your understanding. Knowledge builds from simple, the skeleton, to complex, forming a stronger mental model of the material. The goal isn't to make it pretty. I often see beautiful, color-coded study guides that are really just rewritten notes. But a true study guide isn't about decoration, it's about thinking. It should show your evolving understanding, written in your own words, and organized in a way that makes sense to you. When you explain ideas in your own language, and you're not just restating information, you're rebuilding it in your brain, and that process is what strengthens memory and understanding. It makes it sticky. When your notes are structured this way, you're also reducing cognitive load, freeing up your working memory so you can think, not just copy. Cognitive load refers to the limit of your working memory, also known as short-term memory. The average person can hold only about 4 to 5 ideas in mind before their thinking starts to strain. When you push past that, your brain will literally drop everything. That's why you sometimes walk into a room and forget why you're even there. You have overloaded your mental workspace. So one of the keys to studying effectively is to avoid overwhelming your brain by chunking information. If I gave you my phone number as one long string of digits, it would be hard to remember. But if I gave it in chunks, 3, 3, and 4, suddenly it feels easy. Chunking works because it turns several pieces of information into one mental unit. Each chunk counts as a single item in your working memory, even though it contains multiple details. In other words, chunking is like a mental cheat code, and it expands your brain's processing capacity. Your brain is a pattern-finding machine, and when you group related information into chunks, you're turning random data into an organized structure, something your brain can recognize, rehearse, and store more efficiently. My favorite way to do this is through outlining. You take 4 or 5 related ideas, group them into a bucket of information, and then nest those buckets within each other. Think of it like your computer's file system, folders within folders, creating a branching tree of knowledge that lets you find and retrieve information quickly. When you have a longer list or sequence to memorize, that's where mnemonic strategies come in. Acronyms, acrostics, or even little songs that can help you remember long lists. Those memory tricks absolutely work, but you can't sing and dance your way through an entire exam. The real power comes from combining them with chunking, breaking information into meaningful parts and nesting those chunks like Russian nesting dolls. That structure gives your brain an organized path to follow, making learning more efficient and far less overwhelming. By the time you're done with your study guide, You should feel like you created a master key to your course, a single place where all the scattered pieces of information come together into one clear picture. You've reduced your cognitive load, built a strong schema, and created the foundation for the next step, turning that knowledge into long-term memory through retrieval practice. Put everything away, your book, your notes, your slides, then try to recall the information from memory. No cues, no crutches, just your brain doing the work. That simple act is called memory retrieval, and it's the heart of one of the most powerful findings in learning science, the testing effect. You don't learn best by rereading or highlighting. You learn by pulling information out of your memory, the same way you'll need to during an exam. Every time you do that, the neural pathways that store the knowledge grow stronger. You can test yourself in all kinds of ways. Grab a whiteboard, use a blank sheet of paper, or explain the concept to a friend. When you can't recall something, that's not failure, it's feedback. That's your signal to revisit and reinforce that information. The moment you reach for an answer and almost find it, that's where the real learning happens. Psychologists call this desirable difficulty. It means that when learning feels effortful, it's actually working. The struggle is progress. Each retrieval attempt stretches your brain, strengthens connections, and turns temporary knowledge into long-term memory. So, the next time learning feels hard, take comfort in knowing that it is the feeling of your brain rewiring itself for success. And this brings us to our final step, evaluate. This is where you step back and start thinking about your thinking, what psychologists call metacognition. Ask yourself, what do I actually understand? What's still confusing? Could I explain this concept or answer the kind of questions my professor might ask? You're not just reviewing, you're diagnosing your learning. Active learners are constantly hunting for what's missing. Repetition studiers are simply rereading what they already know. When you evaluate your learning, you are constantly testing your knowledge, finding the gaps, and then going back to the source material to fill them. That process is what turns studying from a passive activity into an active learning cycle. When you do this consistently, you're training your brain to monitor its own understanding. Neuroscientists call this metacognitive control. It's like having a coach inside your head, redirecting your attention, adjusting your strategy, and keeping you focused on what matters most. While the core learning system helps you collect and organize information, laying the foundation for your understanding, the Feynman Technique takes you to the next level. It's how you move from understanding information to owning it. When Richard Feynman was preparing for his PhD comprehensive exams, he discovered a better way to study. He grabbed a blank notebook and titled it, "Things I Don't Know About Physics." Then he started writing, not what he didn't know, but what he did know, from memory. As he wrote, the gaps revealed themselves. He could see exactly where his understanding broke down. Each time he went back to his books, filled in the missing pieces, and rewrote complex academic ideas in his own clear, simple language. That process, retrieval, simplification, and reconstruction, is what made Feynman such a powerful learner and teacher. He wasn't just reviewing information, he was reorganizing it in his own brain, using his own words, and that's how deep understanding is built. Here's how you can use the Feynman technique to level up your own study. Step 1. Create your study materials. Start by building your own Feynman notebook. Use the core learning system to gather everything you need and pull it into one place. Then, rewrite it in your own words. Don't copy the textbook. The goal is to make the information make sense to you. When you translate it into your own language, you're not just memorizing, you're reconstructing understanding. Step 2. Teach it. Now, teach it out loud. When you explain a concept to someone else, or even just to your dog, you quickly find out what you actually understand. If you stumble or can't explain it simply, that's not failure, that is feedback. You've just found a knowledge gap, and this is one of the trickiest parts about studying. So now, go back, review that part that you got confused on, and add what's missing to your study guide. Step 3. Refine it. Once you've found those knowledge gaps, now you refine it. And refining means 3 things. You organize it, rearrange the ideas, notice which concepts depend on others, build a logical flow. Simplify it. Feynman would ask, how would you explain this to a child? To teach a child, you focus on the key concepts and how they form the big picture. You would take complex ideas and find ways to explain them simply. This is the heart of teaching effectively. Einstein said something similar. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Clarity reveals comprehension. You apply it. Find real-world examples, tell a story, connect it to something meaningful and familiar. When you link new information to something personal, it becomes sticky. It moves more easily into long-term memory. This is called elaborative learning, when you take new information and connect it to something you already know. Step 4, teach it again. Now teach it again. But this time, you're not just repeating facts, you're rebuilding knowledge from the ground up, teaching your unique understanding of the material. Each time you go through this cycle, refine and teach, you strengthen the neural connections in your brain. You move from memorizing to mastering. Your understanding becomes more nuanced and personal. The Feynman technique turns studying into active reconstruction. You're not passively reviewing, you're rebuilding knowledge from memory, shaping it in your own words, and testing its strength through teaching. Each time you simplify, clarify, and apply what you learned, your understanding becomes your own. It becomes deeper. But mastering information isn't just a one-time event, it's a process. Learning deepens through repetition, reflection, and refinement over time. That's where the study cycle comes in. It connects everything you've learned here into one repeatable system for continuous improvement, the rhythm of how to study in college. Once you've learned to organize and reconstruct knowledge, the next challenge is consistency, building a routine that keeps your brain in learning mode every week. So what does all this look like during the rapid pace of college life? Here's what I recommend. First, you should be building your study material as you go. If there are 3 weeks between exams, that means you are studying for that class the entire time, not just a few days before the test. Here's what that looks like in practice. You go to class and take notes. After class, take a 10-minute break for a quick brain dump. Grab a blank sheet of paper and write down everything you remember learning that day. No notes, no slides, just your own memory. That one simple step does a lot. It immediately gets you putting concepts into your own words and organizing them in a way that makes sense to your brain. And most importantly, it helps you spot what you don't understand yet. Now, when you sit down to study, pull out your brain dump and fill in the gaps. Add the missing information, clarify confusing parts, and start shaping the content into your study guide. By the weekend, your goal is to finish your study guide for that week's material. When week 2 starts, you repeat the same process. Go to class, take notes, do your brain dump, fill in the gaps, and keep adding to your study guide. Now you can begin memorizing and testing yourself on week 1's material while you're building week 2's. You're building a living, growing document of everything you've learned. When week 3 hits, you're heading into exam mode. At this point, your study guide should be about 90% complete. Maybe a few lectures still to add, but now your focus shifts. You move from collecting information to retrieving and teaching it. This is where the Feynman technique and active recall take center stage. You should be able to pull most of your study guide from memory. Teaching the material out loud, whiteboard it, talk it through with a classmate, go to review sessions, take practice exams. The final stretch is about studying in the same way that you will be tested. That's the study cycle. You start by collecting and organizing, and then you finish with retrieval and teaching. The key, though, is to weave memory retrieval practice throughout the entire process, not just at the very end. Every time you pull information from memory, you're strengthening those neural connections, building durable long-term memories, and transforming information into understanding. That's how you move from barely surviving to thriving in college. College doesn't just reward effort, it rewards effectiveness. Failure isn't due to a lack of intelligence, it's due to a proper lack of preparation. And when you start using systems like the core learning system, the Feynman technique, and the study cycle, you're no longer guessing. You're following an effective neuroscience-based study system. Remember, learning isn't about cramming in more hours. It's about building neural connections that last. When you study this way, you're not just preparing for the next exam, you're training your brain for life. Do you remember that student staring at the 47% on her first biology exam? I've seen that same scenario play out countless times. Students going from F's to A's, and the only thing that changed was their study system. When you learn to study like this, your brain and your grades will follow suit. If this video helped you understand how to learn better, imagine what happens when you apply it every week. In the comments, let me know how this study system is going for you. I would love to hear from you. If you want more neuroscience-based strategies to study smarter and stay calm under pressure, hit subscribe, give the video a like, and you got this. Before effective studying can begin, students need to know how to read. This video dives into the neuroscience of reading comprehension and explains why so many students struggle with textbooks. You will learn how to read in a way that builds understanding instead of fatigue and frustration. Students often tell me they are reading for hours, but nothing sticks. The truth is that most of us learn to read textbooks like we read novels, line by line, eyes moving, brain asleep. But real studying is not reading. It is hunting for information. It is organizing it into a personal structure your brain understands. When you hunt, your attention is active. Your neurons fire together. You remember more. You are thinking, not just reading. Famous physicist and Nobel Prize winner Richard Feynman once said, "You can know the name of the bird and all the languages of the world and still know nothing about that bird." In other words, memorizing vocabulary is not learning. Understanding is learning. In this video, we are going to use neuroscience to move beyond reading to understanding. I'm going to teach a modern take on a classic learning framework called SQ3R: survey, question, read, recite, review. When you learn to read in a way that engages your brain, your understanding and learning will soar. Before you read, give your brain a mental map. Imagine you are going on a hike. You don't just wander into the woods without a plan. You check the trail. You look at a map. You get a sense of where you're headed. Do the same thing with your reading. Look at the headings and the subheadings. Notice the graphs, charts, and bolded text. Ask yourself, what is this about? Why does it matter? How can I connect this to what I already know? What are the key ideas I should be looking for? This quick preview helps your hippocampus, the brain's memory center, create an initial schema, a mental structure that organizes new information as it comes in. Now, when you read, your brain isn't just allowing information to flow by. It knows what's important and it's hunting for it. Your attention will sharpen. This also taps into what you already know. One of the most powerful learning strategies is connecting new ideas to existing knowledge. By surveying the chapter first, you prime your brain. You activate related neural networks that help you understand new concepts and ideas. Question. Curiosity wakes up the brain. It is one of our strongest motivators. When we are curious about something, we want to know the answer. We want to learn. The best students aren't the ones who already know the most. They are the ones who stay curious, who chase understanding instead of memorizing. So how do you do this while you read? Turn each heading into a question. If you see the heading insomnia, reframe it as, what is insomnia? Why does it happen? Why is it important? The moment you ask a question, your brain flips from passive mode into search mode. You're not just taking in information, you're hunting for the answers. You are trying to satisfy your curiosity. That shift will boost your attention and increase your motivation. And here's the payoff. Your brain remembers what it has to work for. A question creates a gap in your knowledge. When you fill that gap, dopamine is released, a neurotransmitter your brain uses to signal motivation, reward, and learning. That chemical tells your brain, hey, hold on to this. This is important. When you work hard and learn something meaningful, dopamine is the reward. It literally feels good to learn. All right, let's talk about reading. Most people think reading is just running your eyes along a line of text and telling your brain what the words say. But that's not what's really happening. Reading is a marvelous trick your brain is performing, and it's doing it fast. Let's start with the basics. When you're looking at a page, your eyes just don't slide smoothly like a camera panning across a scene. They jump, little rapid jumps called saccades. Between the jumps, You pause just long enough to grab the next chunk of information. Your brain pieces those chunks of information together like a flipbook animation. So reading isn't smooth. It's a staccato dance. Not every word matters. The brain learns by making meaning, not absorbing text. Focus on the big concepts behind the words. Read idea to idea, not word to word. When you read, you are engaging with the material. You are having a conversation with the author in your head. You are making annotations, explaining ideas in your own words, connecting new ideas to prior knowledge, highlighting key concepts. The goal is to interact, not just read. When I work my way through a reading, my goal is never to reread it again. It is to hunt and find the key information and pull it out and put it into my own understanding. But what happens when you're reading materials digital? Most course readings are PDFs, and printing everything gets expensive fast. That is why I use UPDF, the sponsor of today's video, whenever I am studying digital textbooks or research articles. UPDF turns passive reading into active learning. Let me show you how. First, annotation. You can highlight, draw, add comments, and write questions right on the page. These are active processing signals that strengthen the neural pathways and improve retention. Second, the built-in AI features are perfect for students. The AI can summarize and simplify the big ideas, so you have that initial framework before diving into the details. And because UPDF has AI built in, you don't have to switch between apps. Another favorite feature, UPDF can convert a PDF into a mind map. I love this. UPDF can also convert PDFs into Word, PowerPoint, or Excel. That is great when you want to build your own notes or study guides. And the OCR feature turns scanned pages into searchable and editable text. It becomes much easier to pull key ideas together. UPDF works everywhere: Windows, Mac, iPad, Android, and even a web version when you are studying in the library or a coffee shop. I used to pay for an expensive Adobe subscription, but UPDF costs a fraction of the price and gives me everything I need for deep learning. One account works on up to 4 devices, and you get a lifetime of updates and strong security. They're currently offering up to 50% off for Black Friday until December 1st. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments. All right, let's get back to the neuroscience of reading. After each section, stop reading and explain what you learned. This does 2 important things. First, it gives your brain time to process the information. When you take breaks, your brain begins replaying what you just studied, and that replay strengthens memory. If you keep jamming new information in without pause, it's like trying to eat without chewing. You have to give your brain time to digest the knowledge. Second, reciting takes advantage of what research shows is the strongest learning strategy, the testing effect. Multiple studies demonstrate that retrieval practice, or active recall, can help students remember about 50% more than simply rereading their notes. And when you recall ideas in your own words, something powerful happens. You start organizing the information into your own understanding. You move from memorization to truly learning. If you cannot explain it simply, you do not fully understand it. And understanding is the whole point of reading. You have just wrestled your way through the ideas in your reading. Good. Now comes the part that most people skip. Review. What does that mean? It's like stepping back from a puzzle you just finished and realizing the picture in the box finally makes sense. Look at your notes, your highlights, your scribbles in the margins. Ask yourself, what is the big idea? How does this piece talk to this piece? What is the story the author is actually trying to tell? The brain does not store knowledge like a dictionary in alphabetical order. It stores knowledge by connections, by relationships. If 2 ideas shake hands, they stay together. If they never meet, one of them will get lost in the woods. When you review, even for a few minutes, you are making connections between ideas. You are telling your brain, this is important. And the brain's like, all right, I'll reinforce the wires. So write a summary, draw a diagram, explain the reading like you are talking to a 5-year-old. If you can do that, you really know it. No fancy words are required. Recite is where you grapple with the ideas, wrestle them into your mental framework, and review is where you take a step back and admire the structure. You say, ah, this is how it all fits together. And once the brain sees how the pieces connect, it keeps the whole thing ready for when you need it. It's easier to retrieve. So here's the big takeaway. Reading is not about finishing pages, it's about building understanding, it's about thinking. Your brain does not learn by watching words scroll past your eyes, it learns by working with ideas, by asking questions, and by explaining what you know. By organizing knowledge so it actually means something to you. If you follow SQ3R, you are no longer a spectator. You become an investigator, a thinker, a creator of meaning, and that's where the real learning happens. Richard Feynman used to say that the first principle of learning is that you must not fool yourself. And the easiest person to fool is yourself. You can trick yourself into feeling like you learned something just because you looked at the words, but when you try to explain it simply, that illusion dissolves. What remains is the truth. Either you understand it or you do not. And if you do not, good. Now you know where to focus. Your brain is designed to learn. Neurons want to connect. Curiosity wants to fire. When you read actively, you're helping your brain become the version of itself that is capable of real insight. If this helped you think differently about studying, tap the like button and subscribe so you don't miss more neuroscience-based strategies that make learning easier and smarter. And if you know someone who is struggling with reading and not remembering anything, share this video with them. It might change their semester. Remember, the goal is not to memorize the name of birds. The goal is to understand the bird. Keep calm, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next video. You got this. Have you ever felt like you understood individual pieces of information, but they never quite connect? That struggle is not a lack of intelligence or effort. It is the brain organizing knowledge. As you learn, your brain builds schemas, mental frameworks that help new information make sense by connecting it to what you already know. When those frameworks are missing or incomplete, learning feels slow, confusing, and overwhelming. This video introduces schema theory and explains why learning happens best layer by layer. Once you understand how schemas work, many common learning frustrations suddenly start to make sense. Most students think their problem is motivation, or time management, or discipline. But the real bottleneck in learning is often something quieter and much more powerful. It is the mental frameworks your brain uses to make sense of everything. Psychologists call it a schema. And once you see how schemas work, learning starts to feel very different. I'm Dr. Eric Albinson, an education PhD and professional academic coach. In this video, I will show you how schemas shape what sticks, what does not, and how you can use them to learn more effectively. Let's get into it. Why new learning feels so hard? Have you ever opened a textbook and thought, I'm reading the words, but none of this is sticking? That is not a willpower problem. That is not an intelligence problem. That is a schema problem. Your brain does not store knowledge randomly. It organizes everything into mental frameworks, shelves, file folders, maps. A schema is the brain's way of organizing information so it can be stored, retrieved, and connected later. When new information shows up, your brain immediately asks one important question. Where does this fit? If there's no place to put it, learning feels slow, confusing, and overwhelming. Why this affects everything. This is why two students can sit in the same class, hear the same lecture, and have totally different results. One student already has a foundation. The other is trying to build the airplane while it is already flying. Schemas grow through experience. When you are young, your schemas are small and simple. As you age, they expand and become more detailed. Your schema for car as a child might be something like something you sit in, it has 4 wheels, and it goes vroom. As an adult, your schema grows to include types of engines, car companies, models, safety ratings, maintenance, gas versus electric, and on and on. The schema becomes more complex as you add to it. Learning works the same way. If you are missing a foundation in math, science, writing, study skills, new information aimlessly floats around in your brain. There's nothing solid to attach it to, and your brain resists what it cannot anchor. That information will fade away. This is also why learning feels faster in subjects you already know well. If you are fluent in a subject, your brain has thousands of places to attach new ideas. You will quickly pick up new information and skills. If you are learning something new, everything is floating and disconnected. With no mental framework, learning is hard and slow. How schemas actually work in learning. Schemas shape learning in 5 powerful ways. First, schemas control attention. Your brain pays more attention to what it already understands. That is why familiarity increases focus. Background knowledge literally tunes your attention system. Second, schemas control learning speed. The stronger your foundation, the faster you absorb new material. Learning accelerates when there is something to attach to. Third, schemas simplify the world. The world is too complex to process raw. Schemas reduce cognitive load by categorizing information so your brain does not have to reinvent reality every single day. Fourth, schemas allow fast thinking. They are mental shortcuts. Your brain is not just storing information, it is constantly scanning and building patterns, similarities, repeats, structures that rhyme with what you already know. The moment your brain detects a pattern, learning speeds up because meaning snaps into place. This is why beginners see chaos and experts see structure. Experts are not smarter, their brains simply recognize deeper patterns because their schemas are richer. Pattern recognition is how raw experience turns into understanding. It is the hidden skill underneath reading, fluency, problem solving, and insight itself. Fifth, schemas shape interpretation. When new information arrives, it either fits in your schema or challenges it. If it fits, it sticks easily. If it conflicts, your brain must either update the schema or reject the information. Your interpretation of information literally shapes your reality. And under all of this is something happening at the biological level. Your brain learns by building and strengthening networks of connected neurons. When information fits into an existing schema, those neural pathways light up together and become stronger. When there is no schema, the brain has very little to connect the new information to. This is why the unstructured information feels slippery. Learning is not just information coming in, it's connections being built. Schemas and transfer, where learning becomes powerful. When new information arrives, your brain immediately compares it to what you already believe. If it fits your existing schema, it tends to stick easily. It feels familiar, it feels right. It slides into place with very little effort. When the information conflicts with your schema, your brain experiences tension. That tension is cognitive dissonance. It is the discomfort you feel when what you know and what you are encountering do not match. In that moment, your brain has a choice to make. It can update the schema, which takes energy, emotional flexibility, and a willingness to feel uncomfortable for a moment. Or it can reject the information to protect what it already knows. That moment of dissonance is often where the deepest learning actually begins. When a schema is challenged and successfully rebuilt, the new understanding is deeper and stronger and more durable than easy confirmatory learning. Your interpretation of information shapes your experienced reality. So the next time you are experiencing cognitive dissonance, don't shy away from it. Keep pushing. Keep trying to understand. This is desirable difficulty, difficulty that leads to deeper understanding. The hidden danger of schemas. Schemas make learning faster, but they also make change harder. We do not approach situations with a blank slate. We bring stories, expectations, fears, previous failures, and internal labels. This is efficient, but it can also harden into bias, false stories you tell yourself, and fixed academic identities like, I am bad at math. This is why students who struggled early on often carry that struggle forward long after the circumstances have changed. Their schema says, I always fail here, and then their brain listens. I have seen too many students be crippled by imposter syndrome rooted in false schemas. But here's the thing. Schemas are not fixed. They grow and adapt as you push yourself to learn. It is essential to adopt a growth mindset and embrace the idea that failure is learning. Build your schema, build your mind, build your strength. How to use schemas to learn better. Here's the quiet shift that changes everything. Stop thinking, this is too hard. Start asking, what do I need to know to understand this? When learning feels overwhelming, it is not usually because you are lazy, distracted, or incapable. It is because the foundation is missing. You are being asked to stack new ideas on air. This is where most students make the wrong move. In an effort to learn faster, students skip the fundamentals and dive into the deep end. Without the proper foundation, they struggle. But they are good students, so they push harder, they reread, they grind longer, and their brains keep resisting because there's nothing solid to attach the information to. This leads to mental exhaustion, frustration, and reinforces the false belief that they are not intelligent. The real solution is slower, and paradoxically, it is what makes learning faster. You zoom out, you simplify, you build a basic schema first. Before you dive into the details, ask, what is the big picture here? What are the core pieces? And what is this concept mostly about? Once your brain has a simple framework to hang things on, everything changes. New information stops floating, it starts sticking. Your brain stops fighting for clarity and starts cooperating with it. That is when learning speeds up naturally. That is when confusion gives way to structure. And that is when studying starts to feel calm. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, follow these 3 steps to help you get clarity. Step 1, name the big idea. Ask one question first before anything else. What is this mostly about? You are not looking for a perfect definition. You are looking for the big idea, the central premise. One plain sentence, simple, no scientific jargon. This gives your brain a place to start. Step 2, find the main pieces. Now ask, what are the 3 to 6 big pieces that support the big idea? Not the details, not the vocabulary list, the major buckets, the systems, the recurring themes, the legs to the table. This is your skeletal framework. You are building the outline your memory will hang on to. Step 3, wire the pieces together. Finally ask, how do these pieces affect each other? What causes what? What depends on what? What comes first? What pushes back? You're not trying to understand everything deeply, but you are trying to understand the relationships between the big buckets and the main idea. You're trying to make the structure visible. Even a rough map gives your brain direction, something solid to attach new ideas to. Remember, if learning has felt exhausting, confusing, or overwhelming, that is not a character flaw. That is a schema problem. And the moment you learn how to build the framework before diving into the details, everything will begin to shift. Studying feels lighter, understanding will come faster, and your confidence slowly starts to rebuild from the inside out. So the next time you hit the resistance, do not push harder right away. Zoom out, name the big idea, find the main pieces, connect them together. Give your brain something solid to stand on before you ask it to climb. If you're ready to stop feeling overwhelmed and start building your schema, hit the like and subscribe button. Let me know in the comments which subject you are going to apply the 3-step framework to first. I post strategies every week to help you learn with calm, clarity, and confidence. Keep calm, keep learning. You got this. In this video, I show how to build a study guide that works with your brain rather than against it. This study guide is an essential part of my system. And once you master it, learning will become much faster and learning will actually stick. I'm Eric Albinson, an education PhD and professional academic coach. The most common issue I see with my college students is overwhelm. They feel overwhelmed by the pace of college. They feel overwhelmed by their studies. That mix often leads to frustration, burnout, and a level of stress that makes learning feel harder than it needs to be. So what is the answer? Students need to learn how to study in a way that aligns with their brains. Most people do the opposite. They push harder, they stay up later, and they cram more in. But the brain doesn't learn by force. When you start working with your brain instead of fighting it, the overwhelm begins to fade. You start to understand what you're doing instead of just trying to survive it. You gain clarity about how to study effectively. And once you see that clear path ahead of you, your motivation will rise because you finally know what to do. Let's dive into it. When students feel overwhelmed, they are usually experiencing what neuroscientists call cognitive overload. Working memory can only hold a few meaningful chunks of information at a time. So when students try to cram too much too quickly, the system gets flooded. It is like overfilling a glass of water. Yes, some stays in the glass, but a lot spills over the sides and disappears. That overload triggers stress. The prefrontal cortex begins to struggle, attention scatters, and learning feels frustrating even when the student is putting in real effort. So what do? We play to the brain's strengths. Neuroscientist David Eagleman often says that the brain is a pattern recognizing machine. It thrives on finding structure in the chaos. Patterns help the brain make predictions, which reduce cognitive effort and conserve energy. When information is well organized, the brain does not have to process every detail from scratch. It can fit new ideas into existing frameworks. Organizing information into clear chunks lowers the mental load on working memory. Instead of sorting through a pile of disconnected facts, your brain now has structured packets it can store, connect, and retrieve more easily. This structure gives every new idea a place to land, which speeds up learning and strengthens memory. It also guards against overload because well-organized information creates less extraneous load on the system. Your brain is no longer wrestling with disorganized material or unnecessary details. It is focused on making meaning. When you build a study guide, you are reshaping the material into a structure your brain understands. That step alone forces deeper thinking because you must identify relationships, sort ideas, and make choices about what matters. By the time you study from the guide, you are no longer memorizing random facts. You are reinforcing an organized framework. Learning becomes more efficient because your brain encodes structure far more easily than it does scattered details. It works like an organized house. Finding what you need is easy when everything has a place. If you know where the tape is, you do not have to search every drawer in the house in frustration. Studying works the same way. A clear structure means less searching and more time for thinking and understanding. There are many ways to build study guides. Mind maps, timelines, charts, diagrams, slides, and flashcards are all useful depending on the subject. In this video, we'll focus on one of my favorite methods, the tried and true outline. Outlines help you build clean, logical hierarchies of ideas that reduce cognitive load and boost understanding. Before you can build a study guide, you need the raw materials. You need the key concepts, the big ideas. When students read, they often feel pressure to go through every word, as if the goal is perfect recall of every last detail. But the real learning is not about scanning every sentence, it's about understanding the ideas behind the text. Do not try to read an entire chapter in one sweep. Break it into small sections. Subtitle to subtitle, idea to idea. After you read a short section, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what is the core idea here? What is the author really trying to say? How does this connect to the larger topic? That pause is powerful. It shifts your brain out of passive mode and into active thinking. You start to organize and explain ideas in your own language, which is one of the strongest learning strategies we have. And let me say this clearly. As someone with a PhD who has spent years reading and writing academic language, academic writing is often terrible, dense, wordy, overcomplicated. I cringe when I see someone trying to sound smart instead of trying to communicate. True genius is simplicity. When you translate dense writing into your own clear and simple language, you are not dumbing it down. You are making sense of the material. You are beginning to understand it deeply. When you look at a long stretch of heavy text, there are usually only one or two key ideas buried in the language. Your job is to pull those out. Those ideas become your building blocks. Once you gather the building blocks, you can begin to organize them into a framework that makes it easier for you to understand. Learning grows from simple to complex. So your first task is to build a skeleton of knowledge. You want the big picture, the structure that everything else will rest on. Once that foundation is in place, you add new information, layer by layer, as you return to the material in future study sessions. Let's practice this together. For this example, we are going to build a study guide from a textbook section on arteries, veins, and capillaries. When I study, I want to poke at the material, scribble on it, capture my thoughts, and really work with it. Learning is not about sliding your eyes across the page. That creates the illusion of learning. Real learning happens when you understand and mentally organize the ideas in front of you. That kind of learning requires active engagement. The whole point is to figure out the ideas. You're not trying to memorize sentences, you are trying to understand what is going on underneath the words. Thinking is the goal, not simply reading. And yes, this kind of interaction takes longer in the moment. The interesting thing is that when you slow down and actually think, you learn faster overall because your brain builds stronger and more durable memories. To show you what this looks like, I will break the first two paragraphs of the textbook into a study guide. I start by highlighting the ideas I want to pull out of the dense paragraphs and move into my study guide. You are not decorating the page, you are digging through the paragraph to find the important ideas, the bits of knowledge that matter. You will also notice that I add comments and use text callouts to flag questions or moments of confusion. Many students think confusion means something is wrong, but confusion is actually useful. It signals that your brain has detected a gap in your understanding. A question simply means you do not understand something yet, and your job, which becomes enjoyable with practice, is to track down the answer. That is active learning, and it is one of the most effective forms of learning we have. We will come back to that idea later, but for now, let's return to the study guide. You are now looking at the study guide I built for this section. The brain learns best when information is organized in meaningful visual, spatial, and verbal ways. Diagrams are the most obvious example, but an outline works just as well because it shows the structure of the material and how the ideas relate to one another. This is especially important when you study science, where you're usually studying systems rather than isolated facts. Section 1 is where I organize the information about arteries. I start with a simple definition at the top, and then I break the topic into two subsections, 1A for aorta and 1B for arterioles. When I begin memorizing, I always start with the basics. I memorize that arteries carry blood away from the heart. The aorta is the main artery. It branches into major arteries. Those major arteries then branch into smaller arterioles that reach deep into the muscles and organs. By laying out the relationship between the aorta, major arteries, and arterioles in a clear structure, I can immediately see how they connect. This structure makes the material easier to memorize because I can close my eyes and picture the layout. Once I memorize that first layer of information, I move to the next. I memorize the major arteries that branch off the aorta. The carotid artery carries blood to the brain. The brachial artery carries blood to the arms. The thoracic artery carries blood to the upper body or chest. The iliac artery carries blood to the lower limbs. When I read about the thoracic artery in the textbook, I had a question about what the thorax actually is. You can see that I answered it in simple everyday language, upper body or chest. Under the thoracic artery, there are also three more arteries. The hepatic artery for the liver, the renal artery for kidneys, and the gastric artery for the stomach. This is how I nest information. The aorta branches into major arteries. The thoracic artery is one of those major arteries. It branches into three more arteries. You can see the entire structure at a glance. If you look at sections 1 and 2 of the study guide, which cover only 2 paragraphs from the book, there are roughly 18 individual points to memorize. If I tried to memorize all 18 at once, it would overwhelm my working memory. Working memory can only handle about 4 to 5 meaningful chunks at a time, and when it is overloaded, performance drops and cognitive fatigue sets in. But I am not memorizing 18 points at once. I am memorizing in small, organized chunks. I start with a chunk of 2, arteries and veins. Then I move to section 1 and memorize another 2-chunk layer, aorta and arterioles. Under the aorta, I memorize a chunk of 4, carotid, brachial, thoracic, and iliac. After that, I memorize a chunk of 3 under the thoracic artery, hepatic, renal, and gastric. So instead of trying to memorize a long list that drains mental energy, I move through a chunk of 2, another chunk of 2, a chunk of 4, and a chunk of 3. Each piece of information is visually nested and connected. The structure helps my brain see the pattern and understand how everything fits together. By memorizing in small chunks, I slowly build out my mental model in a way that does not overwhelm my working memory. Organized chunks reduce cognitive load. Working memory stays within its limits, and long-term memory encodes the material more efficiently. Retrieval becomes easier because you are recalling a structure rather than isolated sentences in a paragraph. In section 3, you can see me return to the question I wrote down while reading. Do arteries only carry oxygenated blood to the body? The textbook didn't answer this directly, so I had to go find the information myself. I looked it up online, but you will probably find the answer in your lecture notes or in your professor's slides. The key point is that I had a question and I went looking for the answer. That is self-directed learning. As I dug deeper, I learned that oxygen levels in the artery depend on where the blood is headed. I also learned that the pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood to the lungs. That raised another question for me. If the pulmonary artery carries blood away from the heart, why isn't it listed with the major arteries branching from the aorta? That question led me to the discovery that the pulmonary artery branches from the right ventricle of the heart, not the aorta. You can see the pattern. I'm now learning on my own, idea to idea, because I am the one doing the searching and making the connections. The information becomes much stickier this way. The brain remembers what it has to work for. Now that the study guide is built, we shift from organizing the material to mastering it. This is where many students fall into the trap of rereading and rereading again and hoping something will stick. But real mastery comes from retrieval. Retrieval is the act of pulling information out of your memory without looking at your notes. When you retrieve, your brain strengthens the pathways that hold on to the information. This is called the testing effect and is one of the most powerful learning strategies in cognitive psychology. One of the simplest ways to practice retrieval is the brain dump. Close your textbook, put away your study guide, then dump everything you can remember about one section of your study guide onto a blank page. Do not worry about getting it right. The point is to see what you know and what you have forgotten. The gaps you find become your next study steps. Brain dumping works because it forces your hippocampus to retrieve information on its own. Each time you do this, the memory pathways get stronger and stronger, which makes the material easier to recall in the future. The next time you brain dump the same section, focus on the areas that you missed. You are no longer studying blindly, you are studying with focused intention. Brain dump each section of your study guide until you can recall the whole thing flawlessly. One of the trickiest parts of learning is figuring out what you do not know. My favorite method for uncovering those hidden gaps is to teach the material aloud from memory. Nobel Prize winner Richard Feynman famously said, "If you want to master something, teach it." Teaching exposes the little cracks in your understanding. I cannot count the number of times I thought I understood an idea until I tried to explain it out loud. If you do not have someone to teach, grab a whiteboard or a blank sheet of paper and talk it through to yourself. What matters is the act of explaining it without looking. When you teach from memory, your brain must retrieve the structure you built. You recall definitions, relationships, and the logic behind the system. Each time you stumble, you have found a knowledge gap. Chase it down, fill it in. That refinement process is where mastery grows. Once you can teach the material in order, begin recalling it out of sequence. This is called interleaving. When you mix the order of concepts, your brain cannot rely on the flow of the outline. It has to understand how the ideas connect. Interleaving is powerful because it develops flexible knowledge. Research shows that students who interleave their practice perform better on exams. They are better at shifting between ideas, recognizing patterns, and applying concepts in unexpected situations. If you can recall concepts when they are mixed, you have moved beyond memorization and into real understanding. Next, practice in the same format you will be tested. If your exam is multiple choice, practice with multiple choice. If it involves written explanations, practice writing explanations. You can also paste your study guide into an AI tool and have it generate practice questions for you. AI can create dozens of questions instantly and vary the difficulty. The goal is simple. Strengthen retrieval in the same format your brain will need during the exam. Finally, remember that science exams are not vocabulary contests. Memorizing scientific terms is not the goal. Exams measure whether you understand how the system works. Can you apply the concept to a new situation? Can you explain the logic behind a process? Students who rely only on memorization struggle because real learning requires understanding the big picture. Let's see how this knowledge works in a real exam style question. Question. The superior vena cava carries deoxygenated blood toward the heart. What type of vessel is the superior vena cava? The classic exam mistake is the panic because you focus on what you don't know rather than what you do know. If you don't know what the superior vena cava is, figure out the answer by focusing on what you learned from your study guide. The question is really asking, what type of vessel carries deoxygenated blood back to the heart? From our study guide, you know that arteries carry blood away from the heart and veins bring it back. So the superior vena cava must be a vein. This shift from memorizing labels to applying concepts is the core skill you want to build in college. In high school, you may have been asked, what is a vein? In college, the questions are not that direct. We want to see if you can apply the knowledge. This is higher order thinking. When you study this way, you move from memorization to mastery. You're training your brain to retrieve information, explain it, mix it, apply it, and use it. That is the path to real understanding, and it is the most reliable way to prepare for any exam. One quick note. After the exam, look closely at the questions you missed. Ask yourself a simple question. Was the answer in my study guide? If it was, that's good news. You already identified the right information. You just need more practice with memory retrieval. If the information was not in your study guide, that tells you something different. It means you are not selecting the right material when you build your guide. Go back to the textbook, lecture notes, slides, or whatever source contained the information and add that into your next version of your study guide. Building effective study guides is a skill. When you use your exams as feedback, you will get better and better and better at choosing the right information and turning it into clear structure that actually helps you learn. In summary, remember, structure reduces stress, retrieval builds mastery, and that combination changes everything. If you found this helpful, please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you are new here, I post videos that blend neuroscience, study skills, and practical tools to help you learn smarter and stay calm while doing it. In the comments, tell me what topics you'd like me to cover next. Thanks for watching, keep calm, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one. You got this. This final video brings everything together. It covers the core neuroscience-based study strategies that are woven throughout the first 4 videos. These strategies form the foundation of modern learning science and explain why the system works, not just how to use it. Most students study in a way that feels productive, highlighting, rereading, and cramming, but their brain isn't learning. It's stuck. The good news? There are neuroscience-backed study hacks that will literally rewire your brain for faster learning and longer memory. I'm Dr. Eric Albinson, an education PhD and an academic coach, and for the past 6 years, I've used these exact techniques to help thousands of college students study smarter and get results. By the end of this video, you'll learn the 5 neuroscience hacks that will cut your study time in half while remembering information 3 times longer, all by rewiring your brain. The testing effect. You know that feeling when you're sure you know something until you see it on the exam? Yeah, that is your short-term memory ghosting you. By far, the best strategy to ensure that you actually know something is to use the testing effect. Simply, you need to study in the same way you will be tested. This means that you need to put away your notes, your book, your study materials, and pull information from memory. It is important to understand that you haven't learned anything unless it's a long-term memory. When you're using a shallow processing technique, like repetition studying, it builds a false sense of confidence. You often think you know the material, you are looking at something, and it is prompting your memory, so you don't really know it. That knowledge is in short-term memory, and when you get to the exam, you'll find out that you are just familiar with the material, and you can't retrieve it when you need it. Students will often sit in my office and they will tell me they know where the information was in their notes or textbook, but they just couldn't access it during the exam. This is a sign that you are studying is mostly rereading your notes, rereading your textbook, and then rereading again. I call this feel-good studying. It is academic work, for sure. You will learn, but it will take a long time. It is easy, shallow studying. It's like training to run a marathon by walking. It's beneficial, you are building capacity, but eventually you need to run. You need to train in the same way that you'll be expected to perform at the big event. Same with studying. To learn quickly, your studying should be effortful, and there's nothing more effortful than pulling something from memory without any prompts. It is proof positive that you absolutely know something, that you're not just falling into that familiarity trap. So what does this look like? Most of my students use whiteboarding. They simply head to the library, bring their markers, grab a whiteboard, and then brain dump everything they know about a particular topic. This process involves deep processing, deep thinking. You are using more of your brain. When you brain dump, something magical happens. You are no longer just repeating what the textbook says, you are reconstructing the knowledge for yourself as a unique learner. By pulling straight from memory, you automatically begin to put things in your own language. You begin to organize information in a way that makes sense to your brain. In other words, you are making knowledge your own. You're making your own meaning. It is the reconstruction of knowledge, not the repetition of knowledge. Tools like flashcards and their electronic counterparts like Quizlet, they're great. They're about memory retrieval, and I am a fan, but they are best for memorizing terms. Ultimately, you need to move beyond flashcards, and you need to understand how all these terms and ideas connect to form a big picture of whatever you are studying. Nothing does this better than whiteboarding. No whiteboard? That's okay. For me personally, I prefer a good old-fashioned pen and notepad. When I'm studying, I just carry around a pen and notepad, and when I get a chance, I will brain dump. You don't even need a notepad. It can be as simple as thinking through the topic while you're driving, running on a treadmill, or just sitting. It doesn't always have to be a formal whiteboarding study session. It's about consistency, not intensity. When you learn how to build in memory retrieval practice, the testing effect, throughout your day, your learning will take off. Spaced repetition. If the testing effect strengthens your neural pathways, spaced repetition gives your brain the recovery time it needs to solidify them. It is about giving your brain enough time to process what you learned. When you study, you are using short-term memory to think about your topic. As you continually think about something, you will begin to create a neural network that will eventually become a long-term memory. This is a process known as consolidation, and it largely happens while you're sleeping. This is why cramming doesn't work. If you stay up late cramming information into your head and you only sleep a few hours, you won't retain what you learned because you're not giving your brain enough time to process the information. In other words, the information will knock around in your short-term memory, but it won't consolidate into a long-term memory. You haven't learned anything unless it's a long-term memory. And learning is the whole point of college. You are working toward mastery, toward a base of knowledge that you will utilize throughout your career. So don't focus on passing a test. Focus on becoming a specialist in an area of knowledge that will become the foundation of your career. Learning is a physical process. You need to give the brain the time to build these neural networks. We inherently understand that putting in one intense workout won't result in being physically fit, so why do we expect a different result for our brains? We build long-term memories through effortful studying. Study, rest. That is spaced repetition. This is how you learn efficiently. Putting in hard work is highly inefficient if you don't build in proper recovery. I've spent 6 years researching these methods. Help me share this science with other students who are still just rereading their notes. Hit the like button and subscribe so the YouTube algorithm knows that this is real science, not just another TikTok study fad. Elaborative learning. The brain is meant to learn incrementally. You gradually build a base of knowledge and connect new information to existing mental frameworks. These mental frameworks are called schemas, and they develop from simple to complex. A child's simple schema might be anything with 4 legs is an animal. As the child learns more about animals, this schema will become more complex. Dogs go bark, cats go meow. That complexity will increase over time. These are farm animals, these are pets, these are jungle animals. This is the incremental learning preferred by our brains. You build a schema, and each time you learn something new, you add another layer of complexity. You add another layer of understanding until you have a deep understanding of the topic. But this type of learning takes time. And if I know one thing about college, it is that you do not have lots of time. A semester is 16 weeks and the exams are often scheduled 2 to 3 weeks apart. You need to learn fast. So college forces you to build schemas quickly. My favorite method is to intentionally construct schemas through study guides. A study guide is a way to organize what you're learning in a visual way. It's a way that allows you to see the big picture and how all the key concepts connect. The first step is to identify those big concepts. These are the things on your professor's slides, bolded in text in your book, anything that signals, hey, this is important information. Once you've identified those concepts, you need to collect them from all the different sources in your class. If you are trying to study from 5 different sources of information, this overwhelms your brain. So find what each of those sources of information says about a particular key concept, and you organize that information into one document, your study guide. So it looks like this. Here's everything I need to know about plasma membranes. Here's what my professor said. Here's what the slide said. Here's what the book said. You gather all that information, you break it down into small, easy to memorize chunks of information. Not surprisingly, this technique is called chunking. Our brains learn better when things are chunked. If I gave you my phone number in one long string, you would look at me like I was crazy. But if I give it to you in a chunk of 3, a chunk of 3, and a chunk of 4, suddenly your brain is no longer overwhelmed. The chunk number is much easier to memorize. So think of everything you are learning as one long phone number string. Your job is to break that string down into chunks of related information. Once you have your chunks, you organize them in a way that shows their relationship to each other. You're building a skeleton of knowledge, the big picture. It's a simple schema that maps out how key concepts are connected. If you're just memorizing facts without building the schema, it's like saving files onto your desktop's computer. Eventually, you'll have so many files that it is chaos, and it's hard to retrieve any information quickly. Unless you build an organizational system of folders, and folders within folders, a branching chain of information that serves 2 purposes. It allows you to quickly retrieve information when you need it, and it gives you a place to put new information. What happens when incoming information doesn't match any of your existing folders? That's when you create a new folder, a new bucket of information. The process of adding new knowledge to an existing folder is called assimilation. When you need to create a new folder for information that doesn't quite fit your existing framework, that is called accommodation. You are expanding and deepening your understanding by adding new information to your schema. This is the purpose of a study guide. It's not just about collecting and organizing information, it's about creating a system for clear thinking. When information is organized, it is much easier to understand what's going on. As you refine your study guide, your thinking deepens. You are forced to filter through information. What's important? What's not so important? What information belongs where and why? Here's an example. Have you ever had a test where you were allowed to bring in a single note card? Well, if you're anything like me, you filled that note card with microscopic writing, the kind of handwriting that would make an ant need glasses. You put every piece of information you thought you might need on that note card. You were cramming it in there so you would be ready for the test. But when it came time to take the test, I know I was always a little surprised at how little I needed that note card. As a learning specialist, I now understand that limited note card space forced me to filter and prioritize information. It made me lock in on those key concepts and how I might need to apply them for the exam. It forced me to think deeply. It forced me to think ahead. This is why it is not nearly as effective to use a study guide someone else created. The creation of the study guide is a key part of the learning process. The study guide is a result of effortful thinking. It's the type of thinking that builds the schemas and boosts your understanding. So if your professor gives you a study guide, that's awesome. They have given you clarity on the key concepts that you should be studying. But their study guide should be a template for you to build your own. You need to build your unique understanding of the material. It's your job to make that knowledge your own, not to memorize how another person's brain made sense of the material. You need to actively master the material in a way that makes sense for your brain. So, elaborative learning is much more than just connecting information to prior knowledge. It's about laying the foundational framework that allows you to both add and expand your knowledge base. It's about creating a schema that allows you to think deeply and efficiently. Learning to intentionally build schemas and actively engage with new information will dramatically speed up your learning. Metacognition. Active is the key word here. Active learning means deep thinking. It means metacognition, a fancy word that simply means thinking about your thinking. When you use metacognition, you're not just absorbing information, you're engaging with it in a meaningful way. You're asking yourself questions like, how does this connect to what I already know? What part of this confuses me? How would I explain this to somebody else? How would I apply this to the real world? Those questions actually train your brain to build stronger neural connections because they force you to organize and evaluate your own thought process. Neuroscientists call this metacognitive monitoring, the ability to notice when you understand something and when you don't. Students who develop that skill learn faster and retain more because they don't waste time rereading what they already know. They don't zone out during lectures. Instead, they are actively hunting for information to add to their schema. I have a friend who's an English professor, and she once told me that when you read, you should be having a conversation with the author in your head. Questioning, agreeing, challenging, connecting. That is metacognition in action. Honestly, I don't think I'm quite at her level, but when I read, I'm not just going through the motions. I pause. I identify key concepts. I write little notes in the margins. I try to connect new ideas to things I already know. I come up with examples. That's the difference between passive reading and active learning, between memorizing and truly understanding. Interleaving. Interleaving boosts learning by mixing up closely related topics, which forces your brain to compare, contrast, and discriminate. For example, learning increases when students practice addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division problems all mixed together rather than practicing just one type of problem. Interleaving works because it requires your brain's full attention. When you mix topics or problem types, your brain can't rely on autopilot. It has to decide which strategy and which concept applies to each problem or situation. The act of choosing keeps your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, actively engaged. During longer study sessions, I encourage students to switch study topics at least every hour. Even if you're studying for the same class, you can jump around to different parts of your study guide. By switching topics, you keep your brain alert and focused. Each time you shift between related but distinct ideas, you activate slightly different neural circuits. That switching strengthens the connection between those networks, helping you see patterns and transfer what you learn to new situations. It's the aha moment, when concepts suddenly click together and your understanding deepens. Neuroscientists call this contextual interference, and while it feels harder in the moment, that difficulty is exactly what drives stronger, long-lasting learning. So here's the big takeaway. Learning isn't magic, it's biology. The more you engage your brain, the more you will learn. The most powerful strategies all have one thing in common. They create effortful, deep processing by actively engaging with the material that you are studying. When you use the testing effect, you're pulling information out of memory and strengthening those neural pathways. With spaced repetition, you're giving your brain time to consolidate and build long-term memory. Through elaborative learning, you're constructing schemas, mental frameworks that make complex information easier to organize and to recall. With metacognition, you're stepping back, you're looking at your own thinking, and you're adjusting as you go. And interleaving keeps your brain on its toes, comparing and connecting ideas until you finally truly understand them. Each of these strategies works because they align with how the brain actually learns, through effort, reflection, and rest. It's not just about cramming more hours in, it's about studying in a way that rewires your brain for mastery. If this video helped you understand how learning really works, please like and subscribe for more science-backed strategies that will help you study smarter, not harder. And remember, keep calm, keep learning, and you got this. I have been posting my academic coaching curriculum for the last 4 months of 2025, and it has been an exciting and humbling journey. Teaching in a new medium has stretched me, and I have learned a lot on the way. Most importantly, I have loved hearing from you. I've loved hearing from people who are starting to feel calmer, more confident, and more in control of their learning. In 2026, I will continue building on this work. New videos will be posted every Thursday morning, starting after the new year. Thanks for being here. Keep calm, keep learning, and you've got this.